Hey guys, welcome back to Conscious Conversation with me, Chrissy J. Today's topic is going to be the power of habits. Thanks to science, we've learned that habits can either make or break your life pretty much. They've made a lot of discoveries just in the past 15 years that helps us see this. Successful author and public speaker John Maxwell said, "You will never change your life until you change something that you do daily. The secret of your success is found in your daily routine." So what makes this so true? Well, let's find out. So before we talk about anything else, I think it's important for us to be mindful of how present and powerful habits are in our everyday life, even if we don't acknowledge it. When you think about it, we really only have access to this moment. We don't technically have access to the past or future. It only exists in our minds. So like the now is all that exists to us right now. So that means it's important that we are productive and positive in this now, which is easiest through our daily routines. If you want to have a successful future, essentially you need to have a successful daily routine, because your daily routine is building up your future. So this is kind of really important. This new way of thinking about habits also sheds new light on addictions. For example, when someone's addicted to cigarettes and they want to quit smoking, it only takes about 10 days for the nicotine to get out of their system. So this means that the physical and chemical addiction only lasts for 10 days. And so if you're wanting to smoke 2 weeks later, or 2 months later, or even 2 years later, when we think about things like drugs, that's because of a mental addiction created in your brain from doing these drugs. Basically through like pathways that are made. This is going to make more sense when we talk a little bit more about the neurological science behind pathways that are made in our brain when we do these things here in a few minutes. We'll get to that. So before we move on, let's just talk about the basics of habits. Well, first of all, the reason that science has made such big leaps in the field of habits in the past 15 years is because they've been looking at it from a neurological angle and not just a psychological angle anymore. So basically, the part of the brain that is responsible for habits is called the basal ganglia, and it's part of our old brain and therefore our subconscious mind. It's in charge of things like our instincts and our feelings. There's not really any decision making going on here. It's just following patterns that are already present. And the part of the brain that we need to use to overcome these habits is the frontal cortex, which is part of the newer brain, and the conscious mind, obviously. And it's kind of important for things like free will and decision making and all of that kind of stuff. So when we're doing something that is considered a habit, the frontal cortex literally hands over control to the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia isn't making decisions, it's just following patterns. So pretty much we're handing over our free will at this point. So if we're using a primitive part of our brain that's void of free will and choice while we're acting out these habits, then how are we supposed to change them or form new ones? Well, that's what I'm here to tell you. So we have to understand that there's 3 components to every single habit, and this is something that they've just learned in this past 15 years through everything they've been studying. So the first component is the cue or trigger, which is basically just whatever makes us think to do the habit in the first place or reminds us to do it. The second is routine, which is like the habit or behavior itself, acting it out. And the third is reward, receiving something in response to the habit we just performed. Usually something good, something that makes us happy, because that's why we keep doing it, obviously. For example, when your phone buzzes or rings and you want to check it, whether you're eating dinner or playing with kids or talking to somebody, this is because the cue is hearing the phone ring and our habit is checking it, and the reward is figuring out whatever content was contained in that notification we just got. So even if you don't really feel like checking your phone, you're going to have a nagging feeling to do it anyways subconsciously, because that habit is in place from using the phone and checking it every time it rings already since you've had it. And so even if you're not really caring that much what message you might have gotten, you're going to keep feeling like you need to check it because it's just a habit we have. This is why so many people are like addicted to smartphones. So how is this helpful to understanding how to change and make new habits? Well, the key to all this information is that during the first and last, or cue and reward phases, our frontal cortex actually is conscious and fully functional. So it's just during the actual behavior or habit that our frontal cortex shuts down and gives control to the basal ganglia, because all we're doing is basically acting out a pattern we've already done a bunch of times, and so we don't really need to make decisions about it. This is why that happens with the frontal cortex shutting down on us, basically. So the key to changing or forming new habits lies within understanding how to use our two conscious components, to overcome the one that is unconscious, the actual behavior or habit. So before we can fully grasp habits, we've got to understand the two methods that we can use to overcome them in the first place. When a habit is formed, it's through a repetition of a single action. So basically, whenever we start to do something more than once, it forms a pathway in our mind, and the more we perform the habit, the stronger the pathway gets, just as the less we perform it, the weaker the pathway will get. So our first method, forming new habits from scratch, clearly wouldn't be that hard to do over time, because we can tell through this that all it takes is repetition, and the more that you repeat it, the more that habit's going to form and the stronger the pathway will be, so the easier it'll be to stick to that habit. But what about when we think about breaking our old habits? What if there is an easier way to form new habits than straight from scratch? Well, how could this be possible when the part of our brain responsible for the behavior isn't even conscious? Well, it's because the cue and the reward are those two phases. So the way that we change our old habits and get rid of them, is not by trying to stomp them out, because it doesn't matter how well of a job you do at not performing that habit anymore, that pathway will always be there. Even if it's weak, it's still going to be there. So the very best way to get rid of old habits is to overwrite them by recognizing the cue that makes us want to perform the habit, and then staying conscious enough to instead perform the new good habit that we want to have instead of the old one, and then making sure to still get a reward that is the same or of equal value, so that we will want to keep doing this better habit instead of continuing to perform the older one that at this point is still stronger. So this just means being very mindful and conscious of the habits that you are choosing to participate in every day. So let's talk about an example of this to kind of show you how actually easy it can be to replace old habits with better new ones by just simply recognizing the cue and still making sure to get the reward. Think about why most people who are using hard drugs use them in the first place. Or in other words, what's their cue? For most people that are using harder drugs, it is a bad feeling, some kind of negative feeling or happening or something like that. And obviously the behavior is using the drug then, and the reward is feeling better, even if just temporarily. Even if in the long run it makes them feel worse, temporarily feeling better at all is the reward. So the way this could be changed is to recognize when we start to feel bad that we can choose to do a conscious action that is healthy to help us, such as like chatting with a friend or watching a funny movie or going and exercising or something like that. And doing this in place of the old bad habit, something that will still reward us with feeling better. And the more we do this and the less we do the drug instead, the weaker the pathway for doing the drug will become, and the stronger the pathway for doing something positive will become at the same time. So that's kind of really good. Also, I just want to mention to you guys that there's 5 categories that these cues or triggers fall under, and these are a time, a place, the presence of other people, an emotion, or a preceding event. By being mindful of these cues, we can better recognize them in our own lives and more efficiently change or form our new habits.